Well, it's amazing how one event can trigger so many memories. We were coming back from Emporia Friday night when word began to spread about the terrorist attacks in Paris. By the time I got home, there were messages on my iPad and emails, and people wanting to know why. Tell me, how does God allow this to keep happening? We watched the news broadcasts and the terror in the people's faces, and suddenly the memories began. And we remembered the day we watched the Twin Towers collapse. It's amazing. We think we've dealt with things and suddenly they're just there again. Hurricane Joaquin caused many of us to remember those horrific days after Katrina hit New Orleans. The devastation, the fear. When you live through one tornado, all it takes is for the clouds to form in just a certain way and the air to turn that heavy, wet feeling, and you begin to wonder, is it going to happen again? Will it hit us again? I mean, buildings are not supposed to collapse. Oceans are not supposed to cause flooding hundreds of miles inland. Funnel clouds are not supposed to dip out of the clouds and cut a swath through a town and destroy everything in its path. And worst of all, humans are not supposed to turn on other humans for no other reason than their faith, their skin color, their nationality, their ethnicity, or their political preferences have to be different than those who are attacking. And yet we live in a world where such things seem to be happening at an unprecedented rate. Reports of natural disasters and inhumane acts fill our airways each and every day. And it's to the point where even our youngest children have lost their innocence. Kindergartners walk by armed guards to get into their schools. You go into the public library and your picture is taken. You walk through a grocery store parking lot and there are cameras pointed at you in every direction. Children no longer know the freedom that many of us had as children. To go to the park by themselves. To walk to their friend's home. Even to come home from school by themselves. It's a violent world, and we know it. And we impress upon our children at a very young age, don't talk to strangers, don't trust them. How odd. When I was first walking home from school, my mother said, if you get in trouble, just go up to a house, someone will help you. Do you think I'd give that advice today? It's a world out there that some of us have difficulty understanding. It's as if the very foundations upon which our lives were built are crumbling underneath our feet and nothing can stop it from happening. Now, believe it or not, in today's gospel lesson, Jesus is trying to prepare his disciples to go into a world just like that. He is trying to tell them that despite everything they're going to do right, despite their deepest faith, people are going to turn on them. They're going to face violence and hatred. And Jesus wanted them to be ready. But they didn't want to hear it. And so Jesus persisted. This was a lesson they had to hear. He wanted them to understand that despite and maybe even because of their faith, there would be wars and rumors of wars. They would face earthquakes and famines, nations rising up against nations, people rising up against others. You read that whole chapter and you begin to despair. But at every turn, Jesus is saying, don't worry. Don't worry. It's going to happen. But don't be afraid. What you have to do is keep your eyes on me. Believe in the promises. And even in the darkest moment, go out and proclaim the word of peace. And then he says, until I come again, whatever happens around you, I want you to promise me that you will live hopefully, expectantly, and faithfully. Now, if that doesn't seem to be difficult enough, in today's world, we're even surrounded by the naysayers. The leaders of the church who are insisting that the signs are pointing to the end. That we are all headed for destruction. How many leaders in how many churches are saying that it is now time to turn inward? Time to protect ourselves. Because God has already given God's judgment to the earth. The end is coming. And there's nothing we can do to stop it. According to the Reverend Dr. Roger Nisioki, professor of Christian education at Columbia Theological School, I quote, numerous publications and internet sites offer formulas for interpreting every tragic event, every hurricane, every war, every famine, every earthquake, every tornado, and may I add, every terrorist attack as part of God's plan for the second coming. Various groups have created their own versions of an end-time clock to tell us how close we are to Christ's return. And that makes Jesus' warning even more important for us to hear today. In the midst of all the uncertainty, fear, distrust, and anger, we, like the disciples, run the risk of losing our focus. We run the risk of falling into the trap thinking that everything is wrong and there is nothing worth saving. We run the risk of becoming so focused on discerning the signs that we forget the mission that Christ has set before us. To go into the world and proclaim the good news. And that's a difficult thing to do. When you're no longer certain of who you can trust or what's going to come at you next. It's hard not to get caught up in all of the signs. One of my favorite authors and theologians is a woman by the name of Kathleen Norris. She admits in one of her books by the title of Amazing Grace, a Vocabulary of Faith, that there was a time in her life when she was so hung up with the signs and the impending end of humanity that she almost lost her faith. And then something happened. Something happened in her life that helped her to go on and to see that even in the midst of tragedy, there is hope. An acquaintance of mine, a brilliant young scholar, she wrote, was stricken with cancer. And over the course of several years, she came close to dying 3 times. But after the extensive treatment, both radiation and chemotherapy, came a welcome remission. Her prognosis was uncertain at best. But she was again able to teach and to write. "I'd never go back," she told her department head, "because now I know what each morning means, and I am just so grateful to be alive." When the other woman said to her, "We've been through so much together in the last few weeks or years," she nodded and smiled. "Yes," she said emphatically, "yes, we have. And hasn't it been a blessing?" How do we find the blessing? How do we wake up each day knowing that life is still worth living? That God is still worth trusting? How can we survive in an unstable and unpredictable world like the one we have? How does one face the devastating news of death, destruction, and disease without losing faith or joining those loud and persistent voices that are calling for gloom, despair, and isolation? And how do we respond when the catastrophes become our own? When our own lives begin to crumble around us? What do we do when we lose our innocence? Well, the first thing that we should do is remember what Jesus told the disciples. Only God knows the time. So watch out. Be careful. And let God lead you. The signs aren't important. Rather, it is the one who is to come. The one who will see us through all of the devastations and tragedies in our lives, so that one day we can see the blessings. One day we can see that hope is still ours. And it is that hope that we should focus upon. Christians, the bad news is that no faith can be strong enough to protect us from all that could occur in this world. From time to time, things are going to fall apart. And yes, it does appear as though there is a certain level of evil that has been unleashed upon the world. But here's the good news. The center will hold. Christ will not be defeated. And if we remain faithful, if we keep our eye on the one who came to save the world and all the people who are in it, the lost, the least, and the lonely, we'll discover that there is still so much to believe in, to hope in, and to trust. If we work together, that peace, that shalom, can still be ours. And when all is said and done, we will hear him proclaim, I told you, I'd be with you forever. And we did it. Good job. To God be the glory. And all God's children say,